Finding the paradigm that most succinctly creates a standard in the way we interact with virtual spaces is a moving target that changes as we are constantly reestablishing the balance between those factors of influence that, by being made autonomous, best complement the utility of the factors arbitrated to be best left to the user's manual control. Control over most programs offers an experience that conveys a clear analog to how its input device would ideally emulate the prescriptive feedback most representative to the user of whatever utility is implied therein, but short of the full immersion implicit in accomplishing the holy grail that is comprehensive brain-computer interfacing, the most essential way to control any protocol is still a practice in literal subjectivity, especially when addressing the question of whether or not said practice should be fun. Video game controllers have pretty much settled into four archetypes, being a gamepad, mouse and keyboard, multi-touch tracking surface, or dual tracking wands. The gamepad being the style that seems to be the most versatile candidate as a general standard for the medium, mostly due to what holds the other styles back, and due to what ground the gamepad still stands to gain in terms of sophistication of usability. Mouse and keyboard is probably seen as the most standard style for the majority of game genres amongst enthusiasts because of how well mouse look works and how clearly well suited the keyboard is for option variability, but its high barrier to general comfort of use and its terrible vehicular control would seem really unappealing to anyone looking for more general flexibility. Multi-touch tracking pads are probably the most widely distributed option in the form of smartphones, but their sense of kinesthetic feedback is massively detrimental to general game feel. Tracking wand controllers are excellent for the immersive handling and spatial manipulation of small objects being held by an avatar, but outside of virtual reality are encumbered by the restriction of what it's like to use them with a screen, making their otherwise complicated nature and real-world spatial needs distractions from their utility, as the Wii can attest to. Figuring out what further changes to a gamepad would need to be implemented in order to bring it closer to its highest universal appeal requires an investigation into what specific form factor and layout best encapsulates the broadest range of the most essential inputs that the games being played demand. In understanding how game design change has influenced gamepad design change over time, and subsequently recognizing where those changes have bred redundancies, those redundancies can show how, due to them being unnecessarily brought forward, gamepad design progress has been stifled by way of aspects that would have been implemented if other things had not been there in their stead. The easiest way to determine if a controller serves all the functions expected of it by all the most essential applications it is expected to control is by determining if there is an established game type that typifies the use of a control layout that fully encompasses all the other essential game genres. And as it so happens, modern terrestrial 3D shooters get sufficiently close to doing just that, and for the most part, all that needs to be done to track the evolution of the gamepad over the last couple decades is to track the evolution of how modern shooters use them. After Turok successfully emulated a mouse-look-like twin-stickish control layout, controllers started emulating that need, beginning with the release of the DualShock later that year. After that, the only thing that has been brought into general adoption are the analog triggers that the Saturn 3D gamepad introduced independently around the same time. Another addition to many, but not all, modern gamepads is the inclusion of some kind of gyroscopic sensor for motion controls, which for the purpose of this essay should be made essential as they are clearly the superior way to aim at something as long as their function is turned off by default, so as to not get in the way of the user's experience otherwise. The standard of having a recalibration button should change to having an activation trigger unilaterally. Lastly, many control designs have tried and failed to introduce the adoption of back buttons, which would allow the user to have functions accessible to their middle fingers without demanding a shift in the way the controller is held. But because of how tall the facial array of the controller is, the placement of back buttons have not yet been designed in a way that feels intuitively ergonomic. In fact, the general adoption of a comfortably placed set of back buttons in accordance with the correctly applied use of gyroscopic aiming would allow a gamepad to offer a comprehensive control set without the need for a facial function array that demands each of the user's thumbs be occupied between two functionally distinct control stations, which would immediately improve the controller's ergonomics and encourage better, more concise, and more accessible software design. This would be accomplished by assigning the left and right back buttons to left and right strafe as standard, which would allow left and right rotation to move back over to the left stick, as once was more common. Without a right stick, there wouldn't be a dedicated control for vertical rotation, other than what the gyroscope would offer, but left trigger would be used as a hold-based gyroscope activation input, allowing for a drag and drop like game feel analog for a proficient player, which once mastered would more than suffice in substituting for vertical look. This would be supplemented with a magnetic horizon that has attractive variability, which increases alongside the avatar's horizontal movement speed. The back buttons can also serve an additional function when pressed simultaneously due to their opposite functionality, which I think would most intuitively be served with a crouch command that has the dual purpose of increasing the left stick's rotation speed for quick turns. This accounts for almost all of the essential movement parameters, and there have not been any assignments given to the right trigger or thumb, which can subsequently be completely made to focus on action inputs and jump, just like the good old days. The one thing that isn't resolved in this vision for a gamepad standard is the incompatibility of a thumbstick with 2D platformers, which due to their popularity have to be accounted for, and by removing the D-pad, the quality of the game feel would be compromised. This could be fixed by the implementation of a control device that maintains the best characteristics of both. The Steam controller seems to attempt this, but ends up failing to be a suitable replacement for either. In trying to design a suitable mechanism, I first came to a conclusion that largely leaves the thumbstick unchanged, but via a switch could have its travel impeded by a subsurface rotating button array, effectively acting as a mechanism designed to convert the stick into a mode with a D-pad-like feel. I think the design would work and is technically viable, but would come off as overly convoluted from a consumer perspective. My second solution was to sacrifice the input sensitivity of a thumbstick and design a high-resolution D-pad that has 16 radial inputs equating to 32 directions, and for the most part, I still think this would be a great replacement for the left thumbstick, but in the end, I like playing racing games with the thumbstick too much, so my last solution was to design a re-engineered style of thumbstick that has a lower tilt resistance with magnetic centering at its base, which would allow for near-perfect centering calibration and a lower chance of stick drift due to less subsequent mechanical wear. The way this would fix the 2D platforming problem is by having new HD haptic motors vibrate every time the stick leaves and returns to center, which due to their increased responsiveness would offer back some of the precision timing a D-pad affords the user. The game feel wouldn't be as good, but it would get the thumbstick most of the way there. And as a final note, we should probably just do away with analog triggers because, sorry gamepad racing enthusiasts, but they take more than they give, and the added back buttons will make up for any loss in precision incurred if adeptly applied.